Okay, and welcome back. Tuesday. Juggling 9 plates in the air right now. Trying to get everything done here so we can have a program and learn some more. And there's more to learn tonight. Dr. Henry Niman is back with us tonight because this vaping crisis, and it really is a crisis. We don't know yet absolutely what's causing it. We have ideas. We're going to talk about those a little bit later tonight. It is something that is impacting and has maybe, and I'm not trying to scare you who vape, maybe has done permanent damage, certainly chronic damage, to maybe millions of vapors. We just don't know. Henry has been in the forefront of trying to pare this down to reality. We've been bringing you many programs on this subject, and we will continue to do so. In the meantime, again, and it's just for me, please, if you're vaping, unless you have a PhD in vapology, stop until we figure this out for you. You're not going to get much from your doctor or local health authorities, but we like to think that this audience cares, and you know we care. So please, if you're vaping, just hang it up for a while. You'll survive. Okay, Henry, welcome back. Thanks for being here, as always.
Well, it's good to be back, and like you said, there's been a lot going on.
Let's jump into this. This is very important. Andrea Duncan. So thank you, Andrea, for posting this. We picked it up. This is an advocate speaking, this lady. She's very much pro-vaping and obviously has done her homework. Now, I'm not saying she has the answer or all the answers, but she sure as hell has some very good information. So let's go through this. And there are 5 paragraphs. They're not very long. I'm going to read them. We'll read the first one, then we'll get Henry to comment.
But read the question, just to give you an idea. This is called Cora Digest, and people write in with questions, and then they have different experts in the area.
Her first statement is the question. Is that what you're talking about?
That wasn't her. That was somebody that had subscribed to it. So that was the question that was submitted to her to Cora Digest, and she answered it. But
okay.
You want to read the question? The question is important. That's what got my attention.
The question is, it's probably the style of your vaping, right?
No. Above it. No. Well, here, I'll read the question because I got it in front of me.
Read the question.
The question was, why do my lungs ache after vaping?
Yes. Okay.
Is the nicotine strength too high? So that was
correct.
The question
that's the general question on Quora.
Was answering.
Right. Why do my lungs ache after vaping? Is the nicotine strength too high? And this lady, Andrea Duncan, wrote the following response.
And just to clarify, she's a former smoker and she's a vaping advocate. So
39 years she smoked. She quit
and
5 years
vaping,
ago
right.
And has been vaping. All right, here's her answer. It's probably the style of your vaping and the high VG of your e-liquid. When you hit your vape, do you do it as you would with a cigarette, first into your mouth, then into your lungs? Or do you simply huff it straight deeply into your lungs right off the bat, so that you can then exhale some humongous cloud that looks more like whipped cream than vapor? That's the first statement of her response. Now, let's go ahead and do this. What's the difference? Smokers take it in their mouth, then in their lungs, and huffing is straight in.
Right. And so give a little bit more of a description. But if you think about that, they can have different effects on your lungs, and she's going to talk about that a little bit. And it could also even have to do with what the temperature is by the time it hits your lungs. And if it's in your mouth, it's going to cool off a little bit more than if it's going to go directly into your lungs. And
this is fascinating.
One is more like a cigarette smoker.
Yeah. When you smoke a cigarette, it's it takes on a different form. Vaping as little micro droplets of liquid. Cigarette smoke is not that. Those are microscopic solids when you smoke a cigarette, not liquid droplets. Different form. Okay? All right, here's the rest of her answer. I'll read the first part again, and we'll go to the second graph right away. She says, it's probably the style of your vaping and the high VG, those are capital V, capital G's, of your liquid. When you hit your vape, do you do it as you would with a cigarette? First into your mouth, then into your lungs. Or do you simply huff it deeply into your lungs right off the bat so that you can then exhale some humongous cloud that looks more like whipped cream than vapor? Our second graph. The first style is called mouth to lung and is the most like smoking. The second style is called direct to lung and bears no resemblance to smoking a cigarette, but is a great deal like smoking pot or huffing chemicals out of a paper bag. For some inexplicable reason, this has become the leading fad in vaping, and also those ridiculous clouds, which are nothing like exhaled cigarette smoke. Those ridiculous clouds are because of high VG in the mix, at least 50% of the mix being VG. Okay, Henry?
Right. Okay, so VG is the vegetable glycerol, and that is basically the type of base that's used for THC. It is it's polar, but it's much more soluble for something like THC, which is hydrophobic, than the PG, which is polyethylene polyglycerol. So the PG
PG is polyglycerol. Yeah.
Right. And so that is what is more common to be used with nicotine, because nicotine is not hydrophobic. So the PG is more polar, and the THC won't really solubilize very well into PG, but it does much better in the VG. Now, the VG is kind of thicker, and that's part of the reason it gets cut with a vitamin E acetate. So that kind of thins it out a little bit. It saves them money, and some people don't like it quite that thick. But the thicker VG, generally you have to turn the temperature up. So you're vaping at a higher temperature if you're doing VG, and you can get different combinations of it, which she'll go into. But the THC users are going to have a higher VG, and they might have VG cut with the vitamin E acetate, but vitamin E acetate has a fairly high boiling point. So either way, you have to pretty much heat it up to a higher temperature than you would for the PG. So the THC users are generally going to be going to a higher temperature. But
because of the high volume of VG in the mixture. And again, to quote her,
so
she
the THC is solubilized. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, she says, those ridiculous clouds are because of high VG in the mix, at least 50% VG, vegetable glycerol.
Right, and she says it's become a leading fad in vaping.
Right,
So you see those pictures all the time on these articles with all this smoke coming out of
it's like they're trying to be Puff the Magic fire-breathing dragon. I think it's a show-off thing, frankly.
But it is it is what ends up in their lungs. It doesn't all just go out like that. They do that
absolutely.
for effect, but they also
the thick, heavy with 50% at least VG, heavier into the lungs. No. All right. She continues. Although sensitivity to PG's drying, irritating effects is far more common, it is not at all uncommon for some people to be unable to huff that much VG, at least 50% VG. It's very thick stuff, and when it condenses onto the surfaces of your airways, it reduces the available airspace and can even cause pain. Remember the original question. Though a sensation of thickness, heaviness, or shortness of breath is more common. For me, if I vape more than 14% VG, I feel like I have a hairball in my chest that I can't cough up no matter how hard I try. So I vape 86% PG and only 14% VG, vegetable glycerol, and that's commonly available 50% or more in these mixes. To repeat again, although sensitivity to PG's drying, irritating effects is far more common, it is not at all uncommon for some people to be unable to huff that much VG. It's very thick stuff, and when it condenses onto the surfaces of your airways, it reduces the available airspace and can even cause pain, though a sensation of thickness, heaviness, or shortness of breath is more common. For me, if I vape more than 14% VG, I feel like I have a hairball in my chest that I can't cough up no matter how hard I try. So I vape 86% PG and only 14% VG. All right, Henry?
Well, just as a reminder, this whole answer has nothing to do with THC. This entire answer is how to vape nicotine. So they're talking about using PG and a high percentage of the PG, and that's not even used for the THC. The THC is using VG, and if they're cutting it, they're not cutting it with PG. They're cutting it with vitamin E acetate. So it's a totally different animal. That is something that's
right.
And they don't call it e-juice. They call it oil because it's more of an oily type of a base because it's mostly VG and it doesn't have the PG. So she's talking about how the whatever percent she was talking about was you can't get above 70%. Or
86% PG, 14% VG is what she vapes.
That's what she's doing, but she's saying that the 70/30 is the highest available PG available, and so
she must be making her own.
Well, I think there are combinations that you can get it. You can get it at those different ratios. But she's only talking about nicotine. She wasn't asked about THC, and she might not really have any experience with THC. She's more the typical who switched, who basically was a former smoker and now is taking nicotine to get off cigarettes.
All right. Once again, her preferred ratio is 86% PG, 14% VG. And the question is, why do my lungs ache after vaping? Is it the nicotine strength being too high? Here's her next paragraph. If you vape e-liquid, which is at least 70% PG, and don't huff it straight into your lungs will probably stop bothering you. It's possible you might need to go even more into the archaic original style of vaping, as I've always had to do, with an even higher percentage of PG. But if so, then you'll have to make your own e-liquid. As far as I know, 70-30 is the highest level of PG available. 70% PG, 30% VG. In commercial e-juice, 70-30 is common. So she is making her own. That's the inference here. And let me finish it up here. And just so you know, it's not necessary, this is key, to inhale directly into your lungs at all. This is nicotine now, as vaporized nicotine is in liquid droplets, not the microscopic solids of cigarette smoke that absorb best in the deep alveoli. Liquid droplet vaporized nicotine absorbs best in the mucosa of the mouth, throat, nose, and sinuses. So what she's saying here is, take the nicotine in your mouth and blow it out your nose. It's going to go right into the mucosa of your mouth and throat and nose, no problem. You don't need to huff nicotine into your lungs. She says it's a hard habit to break when you've been a smoker for a while, but inhaling into your lungs is the least effective means of absorbing vaporized nicotine. You don't have to take it into your lungs if we're talking nicotine here. Just into your mouth, your throat, out your nose. That's all you have to do, because the micro droplets will go right into the mucosa and work their way into the bloodstream. These are micro-liquid droplets. You don't want to be pulling them down into your lungs like you do with microscopic solids from cigarette smoke. You don't need to. So there's a plus there with vaping. You can just keep it in your mouth, basically, and get rid of it. It's a very interesting observation here, Henry, to me. And I'm not a smoker or a vapor.
Right. So, I mean, the take-home message is that there are some major differences between the THC and the nicotine. This is, the base that is in. These are called e-liquids.
Right.
And the others are called oils because they're much thicker and they have to be heated to a higher temperature. And so that's one of the big differences just in the style, not what is cut with and whether it's bought on the street or whether it's bought from a licensed store. That the THC is just more of an oil than a liquid, and or a juice, and it generally is taken to a higher temperature, and so that is one possibility that is being investigated. There was an NPR story today that kind of talked about what the CDC and FDA are doing. And the CDC is going to be looking at the lung tissue of patients, probably biopsy tissue, and look for the chemicals that are in the lungs. And then the FDA is going to take devices and go ahead and make vape and then look at the chemicals that are in the vape. So if indeed there's heavy metals that are coming from the solder or from the platings,
cadmium,
and they're going into the vape, the FDA is going to see those heavy metals. And if those heavy metals are actually going into the patient's lungs, CDC should be able to pick those heavy metals out.
And that would be THC and nicotine.
Well, right, but it's probably going to be somewhat temperature dependent. So,
right.
So if you're taking THC, you're probably going to a higher temperature, and it'll be easier to pull those heavy metals out into the vape than it would at a lower temperature. So that could explain what the difference is, even if you're using kind of the same devices, because one, the temperature is higher for the THC and more likely to get contaminants from the device than the nicotine. and that might also be influenced by who's actually doing the vaping, because these people that are, the ones that are most vocal about the nicotine are generally people that are trying to get off smoking. They're an older population, and they've never even thought about doing THC. So, like this is written, they never mention THC. They never mention, higher percentages of VG. They always talk about the lower ones, and she goes all the way down to only having 14% VG. So it's almost all PG that she's using. So the difference in the one being hydrophobic and being in an oil versus one being hydrophilic and being in a water-soluble base affects how high the temperature is, which could affect what comes out of the device and into the vape. So these new studies that are actually just beginning could provide some insight as to what's actually in the vape. And they do mention that the temperature can change what's in the vape. So I think they're on the right track as far as what they're doing devices-wise. And it may be that simple. It is a temperature issue. The two different groups use different temperatures, and you see it at a low frequency in the nicotine users, and you see it at a high frequency in the THC users. Although that doesn't mean that over time the nicotine doesn't catch up. It just takes longer for them to get this disease than the.
All right, Henry, hold on. Can you stay over for a little bit? I want to go through some of this again, then I have some more questions that I want to get put on the table. If you can hang on, we'll take our top of the hour break and come right back and continue. I'm going to go through this statement again for all of you out there who are former smokers and using vaping and only nicotine to try to get some relief. And remember that the original question, someone wrote into the Quora, QUORA.com site, why do my lungs ache after vaping? Is the nicotine strength too high? Just quickly, Henry, before I go into this again, the breakdown in vapors, 70% nicotine, 20%, was it 30% or 71% nicotine, and allegedly 29% THC. Was that the breakdown? Do I remember correctly?
No, it's the other way around, and that was just in the New England Journal of Medicine. The overall is about 90-10 now. So it's 90% THC, 10% nicotine. So the vast majority of the cases that are in the hospital are THC patients.
All right. Now, do THC vapors use this at least 50% VG? What is the VG percentage that we usually will see with THC use?
I think it's very high. I'm not sure if it's got any PG in it. And 47% of the samples that have been tested do have the vitamin E acetate. So instead of cutting VG with PG, they cut VG with vitamin E. And
and define VG again for us. It's vegetable glycerol. Right. Okay.
And so it's more, the THC is more soluble in VG. VG has got kind of a lipid-like backbone. So it's soluble, but it's much better for THC.
So that 71-29 was just that one sample group. Okay, I got it.
That was from the New England Journal of Medicine. So they had there were 12 that were THC or CBD, and 5 that did not have did not acknowledge that they had THC anyway.
All right. When she says the average commercially, she said the highest level of PG available in commercial e-juice, nicotine, is 70%. And
right.
what you're saying, that's PG. And what you're saying
right.
is that in THC use, there's very little and sometimes zero PG.
Right.
It's all VG.
Right, because the PG is polar and is oil and vinegar kind of thing. The THC is hydrophobic. It doesn't like water, so it doesn't like going into PG. It'll separate from the PG. It won't dissolve into PG. It'll dissolve into VG, and it'll dissolve in VG plus vitamin E acetate. That's also hydrophobic. So, and that's why they call it oils. They don't call it, e-liquid, or e-juice. They call it, an oil. So that's what the big difference is. And oil, it has a higher boiling point, and so they heat it up to a higher temperature. And if they're going to be pulling any heavy metals off the device, those heavy metals are going to come off the device much more easily at a higher temperature. So at a higher temperature or prolonged use at a higher temperature, maybe you have to use the device for several months or several years, and it'll basically have some metal fatigue and low. Heavy metals will come off, and the symptoms of heavy metals is similar to the symptoms that these patients have. So,
all right.
So there is that.
Okay. What I would like to do, keeping in mind that this is, as Henry said, it's approximately 90% THC use, 10% nicotine. This letter is for nicotine vapors. But I want to read it anyhow because it's very instructive. It opens several doors for THC people to think about. So I'm just go through this again. She writes, regarding the question again, which was, let me do the question. Why do my lungs ache after vaping? Is the nicotine strength too high? Okay? And this name, again, is Andrea Duncan. We want to give her credit. Smoked for 39 years. She quit 5 years ago and has been vaping nicotine for 5 years. She says, in answer to the question, why do my lungs hurt? It's probably the style of your vaping and the high VG, vegetable glycerol, in your e-liquid. When you hit your vape, do you do it as you would with a cigarette? First into your mouth, then into your lungs. Or do you simply huff it straight deep into your lungs right off the bat so that you can then exhale some humongous cloud that looks more like whipped cream than vapor? The first style is called mouth to lung and is the most like smoking. The second style is called direct to lung and bears no resemblance to smoking a cigarette, but is a great deal like smoking pot or huffing chemicals out of a paper bag. For some inexplicable reason, this has become the leading fad in vaping, huffing, and also those ridiculous clouds which are nothing like exhaled cigarette smoke. Those clouds are because of high VG, vegetable glycerol, in the mixture, at least 50% VG. Although sensitivity to PG's drying, now PG's the other one, PG's drying, irritating effects is far more common. It is not at all uncommon for some people to be unable to huff that much VG. 50% or more. It's very thick stuff, and when it condenses onto the surfaces of your airways, it reduces the available airspace and can even cause pain, though a sensation of thickness, heaviness, or shortness of breath is more common. For me, if I vape more than 14% VG, vegetable glycerol, I feel like I have a hairball in my chest that I cannot cough up no matter how hard I try. So I vape a mixture, 86% PG, 14% VG. If you vape e-liquid, which is at least 70% PG, and that's very common, and don't huff it straight into your lungs will probably stop bothering you. It's possible you might need to go even more into the archaic original style of vaping, as I've always had to do, with an even higher percentage of PG. But if so, then you'll have to make your own e-liquid. As far as I know, 70-30 is the highest level of PG available in commercial e-juice. 70% PG, 30% VG. And just so you know, it's not necessary to inhale into your lungs at all. Now this has to do, remember, with nicotine, as vaporized nicotine is in liquid droplets, not in the microscopic solids of cigarette smoke that absorb best in the deep alveoli in your lungs. Liquid droplet, vaporized nicotine, absorbs best in the mucosa of the mouth, throat, nose, and sinuses. So you really don't even have to pull it into your lungs. It's a hard habit to break when you've been a smoker for a while, but inhaling into your lungs is the least effective means of absorbing vaporized nicotine. And I hope that helps all of you who are doing this. Henry, go ahead.
Well, it kind of shows what these dramatic differences are between those that are taking THC and those that are taking nicotine. And, as an aside, the group that it falls into the highest category, which is 60%, do both. So 60% of the cases that are in the hospital, they, in the last, 3 months or so, they have had both nicotine as well as THC. So they're doing both of these. And I could imagine that for others that are just doing THC, they could get confused at what temperature they're supposed to be. Those that are just doing nicotine, they could get confused and they might take it up to a higher temperature. And so they're at a temperature because their friends that are doing THC are at this higher temperature, and they don't realize that for the nicotine, they can do it at a much lower temperature. And it's the same thing, the people that have quit smoking, and are just taking nicotine, they're going to say, well, I would never go up to these higher temperatures. Why do they need to do that? So it's kind of two different worlds, and they're kind of viewing this totally from different points of view. And the nicotine group is saying, this is fine, there hasn't been any problems with this, and at the lower temperatures, there very well may be fewer problems. And for those that happen to take it at a higher temperature, they go and they get into trouble. They're not the majority of the ones that are in trouble, but the cases that are being seen now are all relatively short. Most of these people have been vaping for 1 to 3 years. And so what the long-term effects of vaping THC over a 5 or 10 year period is not that well known, and these numbers could go up very dramatically. I mean, we're going to find out in the not too distant future, because the deaths so far this week seem to be down. I haven't seen a report yet of a death this week. They usually come out on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so they could make up for it tomorrow and on Thursday, and this week may be similar to previous weeks. The number of cases, that jump in Texas was pretty significant. They were up like 28. They do it weekly, so that was 28 new cases. And frankly, they're number one today. Illinois will probably take the lead back as soon as they report this week. They're only 10 behind them. They're at 137. And so the chances are they'll go above 150 when they report this week. In California and New York are uneven. They're not. Neither of them. One's 135, one's 128. They haven't reported yet this week. Well, California did an update, but I'm not sure. It was only like 3 cases, and I have a feeling that that's just kind of trickling in, and those numbers are going to go higher. But in any event, the number of cases seems to be pretty steady, and it's been running at around 275 or so each week. And the number of deaths had been going up. It was 7 last week. That was the first drop. The week before it was 8. And those are the 2 highest weeks. And whether it's going to get up there again this week, I don't know. But the complication is the flu season. The flu season is getting ready to kick into gear, and it's supposed to be a fairly severe flu season, and then that's going to create all kind of havoc. Because number one, the diagnosis is going to get confused because the symptoms are fairly similar between the flu and the vaping, and so somebody might actually have the flu and take a flu test and be positive, and they figure, just rest or take Tamiflu or something, and you'll be fine. And then they send them home, and then they could very well have both, and the flu could exacerbate the condition of their damaged lungs, and they could seriously deteriorate. And others that even aren't vaping, if they stop because they heard all the news, they could still be in trouble because their lungs haven't recovered, and then they get a viral infection thrown on top of that, and the lungs will be much more susceptible to further injury if they're already damaged and have not repaired. And exactly how long it takes to repair is still a little bit unclear. Whether how long lasting these effects are. But a lot of the patients that have been discharged are healthy enough to leave the hospital and get off an ECMO machine so they can breathe on their own, but they still have trouble going upstairs, and they still don't have the energy level they have or the stamina they had, and how long it takes for that to come back, I don't really know. I think most people don't know for sure. This is a fairly new phenomenon. So that's kind of where things stand. The data that the FDA and CDC are going to get by looking at what's in the vape and what's in the lungs might be able to more pinpoint the cause. I mean, the problem right now is there's no one thing that's in common as far as additives. I mean, there's one issue with street drugs, but it's not really clear that the street drugs are the contaminants are the cause. I mean, it was widely assumed that the vitamin E acetate was really the cause of the injury, but it was really thought that it was involved with the lipoid pneumonia, and the 2 studies that looked at the biopsy said they didn't see any lipoid pneumonia. They just saw a chemical injury. So, I mean, vitamin E acetate is commonly used in skin creams. It's not like it's a new compound that nobody's ever heard of, or somebody's cooking up in their basement. You can buy vitamin E acetate in various skin creams, or you can get an industrial strength and buy it by the gallon and or barrel, and it is a lot cheaper. So you can not only cut the viscosity of the VG, but you can also cut the cost of the oil, and that part of the reason it's there. But it's only in 47% of the samples anyway. So more than half of the samples do not have vitamin E acetate. So, even if there is some indication that it does some harm and contributes to the lung injury, it wouldn't really explain what happens to the 53% that don't have the vitamin E acetate in it. So there hasn't been one thing that's been nailed down. I mean, what is in common is that they all vape, and the THC are going to vape at higher temperatures, but they aren't necessarily all going to be lower for the nicotine. And you can have newer users that basically go to this higher temperature, or alternatively, their lungs are already damaged enough from smoking that they switch over and then they start getting into trouble. And previously, they could have been easily missed. I mean, these first two cases that were in the New England Journal study, they were hospitalized in 2016 and 2017. And the only reason the current researchers knew about them is they basically did a search in the database and said, in the intake or whatever, that these had vape cigarettes. And so it was in their chart. And then they found them, and then they looked at their biopsies, and they looked like all the rest. They got the same ground glass opacity, and they got the same types of features that they had that were consistent with a chemical burn.
Yeah, so, Henry, there's an interesting little sidebar to this. Henry gets response from. We have just 3 minutes left. You get response from vapors to some of your posts and so forth. You get some hostility. Some of these people don't want to hear it, do they?
No, well, I mean, the way they view it is that they've never had a problem, and all of a sudden they've got these younger kids that are out, vaping THC because they want to get high, and now, their parents and others that don't vape just want to ban all the vaping. And they don't even like calling the THC vaping. They say, vaping is just nicotine. These guys are doing something totally different. And in one sense they are, because it's more like an oil than a juice, and it's a thicker, and it's at a higher temperature, and it is somewhat different. But the data kind of suggests that it's not exclusively the THC, and so they say there have been 0 cases, so they wouldn't count these two. I mean, these two, they would come back and say, well, they were smokers who basically stopped smoking, and they started vaping nicotine. But how do you know they didn't take THC? You have to do a urine test. And so this study, New England Journal, they did do urine tests. So they say that doesn't prove it. Then you go and take the ones that did take a urine test, and they were negative for THC, and they say, well, maybe they didn't know, maybe there wasn't any THC in there, that they were taking some other street drug in there, and they thought it was THC, and so their urine's negative, but it wasn't that they were smoking nicotine, they were smoking some other street contaminant, and that's what caused it. And so they'll use those kind of arguments, and they'll stick and say, there's nothing wrong with it. We've been doing this for 10 years. Go away. and if you tell them,
famous last
10%
words
that are positive, they don't like that.
Famous last words. Let's hope not. Henry, thank you. I think this is a very important program, and I think it does shine a light into some dark areas, which is I was very grateful to see it. So, thank you.
Okay, well, I mean, there's testing going on. I think it'll get resolved in not the too distant future, at least what causes it, as far as solving the problem of who's vaping. And whether they believe it or not, that's a totally different one. Okay,
Indeed.
Good talking.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Night. All right, Dr. Henry Niman, PhD.